L'écho du bal.
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 Du bal.
L'écho du bal.
Bienvenue dans l'écho du bal, une série de podcasts pour prolonger l'exposition On Mass Hysteria de Laia Abril. Dans cet épisode, l'artiste Laia Abril échange avec Diane Dufour, co-directrice du bal, autour de la genèse de son projet. La discussion est en anglais.
I think we should start by saying that you are Catalan. You are 38 years old, and the reason why I want to stress that is that this specific project on Mass Hysteria, you started it so more than 10 years ago. 10 years ago.
Yes,
So you were 28. So it's quite impressive that very young you started to be interested in quite a complex question. So we will come back to that. You are part of this generation, and this we will come back also on that, of the artiste-chercheur, which is a new kind of, not new, but kind of important trend of creation, contemporary creation today. And we will come back on the definition maybe, or the scope, or what it means to be an artiste-chercheur. And you have been very recognized by a lot of awards. You are in the collection of the Pompidou Center, of the Victoria and Albert Museum, just to name a few. You have received a large number of awards. Only last year you received the prize of the best Spanish photographer of the year. You've been nominated at the Dutch Bourse. So you have quite a large influence coming from not only what you've done previously, but also the two first chapters, we will come back, of Une histoire de la misogynie. Since the Mass Hysteria, on Mass Hysteria is the third chapter of this very long-term investigation that you did on the power that is that are facing women throughout the centuries and throughout the continents. So we are very proud to have been able to start this collaboration many years ago, because it takes many years to be committed to such long-term investigation of yours. Maybe we can start by how did it start in your mind? Why did he? Because this third chapter, you explain very well that it is in fact the genesis of the whole history of misogyny. Mm-hmm. So how did you get the idea? How did it come to you?
Hello. Bonjour. Thank you so much for being here. So I studied journalism, and very fast enough I realized journalist writing was not meant for me. I jumped into photography, into photojournalism for a second, and I also realized photojournalism was not for me, especially because when I wanted to talk about these topics that I found really important, often the reaction would be that these were soft news, or this happened in the past, or this happened in other countries, whatever that meant. So I started to accumulate ideas and accumulate projects and accumulate stories. And at some point, after working on my long-term project about eating disorders, I realized that many of these stories connected to abortion, rape, hysteria, menstruation, feminicides, they will have obviously an element in connection, which was the different ways society has been trying to control women for many, many, many years. And I really found interesting this idea of linear chronology, like history, because we have this tendency to think that this was worse in the past and now we're better. No, this idea of evolution and success, which were being proven over and over and over. Starting for today, Trump is getting again back into office. How obviously history is not linear. No, so I put together all this research. I did a very rough dossier. Originally were 7 chapters. I don't think it's going to be 7 chapters, don't worry. And actually the first was on abortion because, again, it's always a piece of news that triggers fear on me. In this case, it was the fact that the Spanish government wanted to make, I will show you some photos of its installation. The Spanish government wanted to restrict the law of abortion. And because I was born in democracy and I already have the right access to abortion in Spain, I never thought that it was possible to not have it again. So On Abortion was born through this fear, and it was the historical element in every chapter has a different approach. In the case of On Abortion, it was a comparison between the present and the past, and my personal approach was to show the repercussions of not having access to abortion. So if each chapter has the same configuration. There is a piece article in the news that it provokes me some sort of shock. There is a historical element that I decide with different angles, and then I chose a personal approach. With On Abortion, it was also very important to show it in countries and in places where it was illegal at the time. I don't know how many shows we've done, but with all a history of misogyny, I think it's 25 countries and 40 shows. And I think this is very important because to being able to find institutions and curators who are brave enough to show this, it was as difficult and important than actually making the project. So it's an ongoing project, and that's how On Abortion was born. The research element and the way that I visualize, it's also different in each of them. In here, I would even say that because I was working as a documentary photographer for a long time, it still has a lot of documentary elements on it, but already in this project, in this chapter, I start to have a meta-analysis, which is very present in Mass Hysteria, of the role of photography, and especially the responsibility of us as photographers. The second chapter on rape, again, was triggered by a piece of news. Obviously, it was during the Me Too and Harvey Weinstein and all these cases were happening, but it was a specific case that happened in Spain that it was really, really shocking to us, in which, I don't know if you know, this case was called La Manada, and 5 men gang rape a woman. And the issue is, then Spanish people got into the street. And the issue was not that we were shocked because of our gang rape, because we're kind of used to it. The shock was the fact the institution, the Spanish society, and especially the trial, was a disaster, because at first they didn't condemn them for rape. They only considered that it was abuse. And this was also filmed, which was also one of the first times or the beginning of society being able to see evidences of violence or rape in film. So in this chapter, again, same structure. I have this piece of news that is shocked me and want me to think or reflect about the subject. In here, instead of wanting to visualize the victims of these rapes, I wanted to do the opposite. I thought for first time I see all these newspapers having these portraits, in the covers of the magazine. I'm like, okay, for the first time, this soft news that they told me were not important 10 years ago, now they're making the covers. But the problem is now we have social media. So we are all judging these people, and the pressure that we put on these people is massive. So I decided to move the pressure from them, and instead of focusing and photographing the people, to photograph the institutions, the church, the military system, the marriage system, religious systems, the prison. So kind of, put the pressure and the blame in the institutions instead of the victims. And here, historically speaking, didn't make sense to make a comparison between the present and the past, but here the historical component, what it does is to look for the origin of these myths. So again, same structure, but different decisions around it, and this is, the second chapter.
So since for you it's very important, I like you say I was under shock by fear. So what kind of fear triggered on Mass Hysteria, and why was not on Mass Hysteria like you have conceived it at the beginning, the first chapter?
Yeah, so when I was doing these 7 chapters, I obviously witch hunt. It was actually, honestly, I never said this before. On a history of misogyny, which is very important, and you say it very right, is a history of misogyny. I'm not doing an encyclopedia, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a historian, it's not the history of misogyny, it's the history of misogyny. I react to my process and my investigation. Original was called a witch hunt. Originally, in the first dossier. So this idea of persecution and this idea of resilience and resistance, and the idea of these women organized and being persecuted was the first story in my mind. And I know calling it the genesis is a little bit confusing for everybody, and I know I'm taking a big jump on my own, intuition, and it's connected to my personal experience here. But it kind of feels the beginning of many things, the beginning of the project, and also the beginning of us organizing ourselves and resisting to this oppression. And I knew I wanted to do something about hysteria, but the problem is a lot has been done. The same way a lot has been done about rape, and a lot has been done, maybe not that much about abortion, it's at least in photography. So I was waiting for some story to happen, that I could take to myself and I could investigate something that it was different. And it was when I was doing this research in Nepal that I was working in this menstruation myths series that is part of the project, that I found this article that I mentioned in the text and I explained in the opening. A girl suffered mass hysteria in Nepal school. And I've never heard about this mass hysteria element, and I've never heard about in contemporary times, because obviously these witch hunts have happened in the past historically. And this particular line that says that maybe the problem was mostly men, the teachers were only men, it kind of made me feel that it was very interesting, because obviously I'm not from Nepal, obviously I didn't go through a mass hysteria case, and there is a lot of distance between what they go through with what I go through. But I do remember growing up in a school and not having female references. I do remember feeling a teenager that no one understood or believed. I have an eating disorder for 20 years, and there is some sort of parallelism also in the way it's a teenage disorder, and I found that there was a specific group of the population that we dismiss so much that it really resonates. And then when I started researching and I started to talk to people, this is the first person I talked to. She went through, when she was a teenager, now she was an adult woman. I was obviously fascinated by the fact that we have no answers, or we don't have answers that convince me, or I didn't have any answer, at least at first, at the beginning.
Alors, the hysteria is a well-known concept, or I don't even know if it's a concept, the denomination, we would say in France, that of course have been through a lot of debates and up and downs, I would say. What I found very interesting, and maybe that is one of the reasons also we jumped with you on the to be part of it, is that at Le Bal we've always been very interested in a very simple idea about missing images, les images manquantes. What are the missing images? Since all our lives, private lives, professional lives, are filmed, registered, recorded, of course the images that can't be seen are especially relevant, because they mean something about censorship, about society, about domination. So what is very interesting also in that case of on Mass Hysteria is that at the beginning there is of course very few images, hundreds of cases, but very few documentation, very few journalist investigations. So suddenly there is a kind of huge gap or huge void about how things can have happened and what they mean. And so it's interesting that coming from both journalistic and photography background, your first impulsion is to fill the void and to try to bring these missing images, to reduce the missing element and to bring a voice, which is a kind of citizenship will. That is so important today, because of course what is hidden to us today is structurally political, and in a way we need to resist this thing. So I was appealed to that, and you said to me the other day that the idea that it was not hysteria individually but collectively, that suddenly it brought a kind of huge scale in the enigma, in the fact that how come hysteria, which is supposed to be a disease or a trouble suffered by someone individually, can be collective.
Yeah, and the collectiveness, it brings this mystery to it, which obviously also fascinates me at first, but it also has a problem. When it's in a group system, it's more often ridiculized by society, especially in the media. Mystery illness, this kind of teenagers, hysterical teenagers, and so and so. And the collectiveness is interesting because obviously what you said, how it spreads, why it spreads, how most of the time affects teenagers and female teenagers, and those are the biggest questions. But I think since the beginning, one thing that I have the intuition was going to be interested is because I research a lot about psychology, and psychology, especially Western psychology, has this tendency to connect the individual trauma to the person suffering from a mental issue. And we connect it to their family trauma, we connect it to their own circumstances, but we look at it as a collective, then we get a little bit lost on how to talk about it if it's not a trigger by a specific event that happened to all of them. So that was the small door that opened eventually to the main point of this investigation for me, which is to reflect on how it's possible that society is making us sick. I remember a paper investigating on how racism could provoke tumors, that I was fascinated by it, because we never connected to it. We don't really see how this political oppression can actually make us physically sick, which we make this separation between the mind and the body, and somehow when it's connected to the body, we have this obsession to find the biological origin, instead of thinking like, maybe it's the oppression and the politics that is making these people this sick, and also, which is even more complicated, what it means to be sick, and the problem of sickness and mental sickness with women, and the very paternalistic perspective that we also endure during years. I have to, for a long time, and still to this day, I have these two problems. If I take the sickness and the mental health element from it, and I talk about protest and I talk about politics, I like this approach, but also maybe I'm missing some element that is connected to their physical being. But the physical being element and the mental health in women is extremely victimizing and paternalistic. So we are navigating these two extremes, and I have to find myself in this process, which is being the most difficult part of the project.
One thing that people discover when they see your installation at Le Bal is the scale of these cases, because I remember being very surprised myself, and I know the viewers of the show are very surprised to discover. So you are showing 68 archive case dating from, I think the first case is in France, 1400 with nuns, and it's a very interesting first case, because the denomination of the case is épidémie de miaulement, and we wonder who said that, miaulement, this very strange title, miaulement. Maybe they were only screaming or more.
No, they do actually.
We don't know. We don't know. We don't know if we know, but somebody said the other day, but in your archive, in the case, they say it's a priest who said that. So obviously, cats connected to devil, cat connected to miaulement. So it's already a judgment to say that they are not only maybe screaming, but they are miaulé. I don't know how to say miaulé in English, but anyway, so. Mewing. So okay, so it's very interesting that from the beginning there's only the revelation of the case, of the collectiveness of it, but also very at the beginning the denomination, that how is it characterized. So the 68 cases are impressive because we follow many centuries. We are very many cases in all continents. So how have you been able to access these cases?
Yeah, so The classification of the folders is not journalistic or either academic. I know we talk about research and we can talk about that in depth after, but at the end of the day, many of the decisions connected to everything downstairs and upstairs, it's very personal. And of course I have my background in journalism and I have a protocol and a methodology and I am very thoughtful through the process. But at the end of the day, I make choices also based on artistic decisions or personal decisions. So the 68 cases are actually not 68. It's actually more because some of the folders have many cases together. Sometimes it was a decision that from one case we just have one small article and there were very similar cases happening in the same country the next years, so we accumulate. So some of the folders have thousands of people. For instance, the one in Nepal is a span of 3 years of cases, and I don't remember exactly, but I think it's in 100 schools, so it's thousands of girls. Or the same in West Bank, like thousands of girls. So the way that it's organized, it's by country, it's by year, or by a span of years, and by symptoms. And what is interesting is like what I wanted to show you, obviously, is the scope, the scale, the fact that it happens in all the continents and is happening until 2024 from the medieval times, and also the type of material that I collect. I collect obviously news articles for the more recent ones, but also from some older ones, from old newspapers. I collect academic papers. The academic papers come from either sociology or anthropology, either medicine, that could be neurology studies, or it could be psychiatric studies or psychological studies. A lot of the content, obviously you have to contextualize it in the years, sometimes it's very misogynistic, either or very racist and colonialist. So I sometimes highlight in the book especially that you find the collages of the archive, how they've been, mistreated or misunderstood for a long time. Some of the articles are brilliant and are great. It's obviously all mixed. And that was my process. My process was jumping from an article that talks about exorcism and mysteriousness and hysteria to people really trying to look at the brain and trying to find the origin. And in this extreme of opposition, in the middle, I found the anthropologists and the sociologists I resonate more with. And then they classify, because obviously all this is a very complex classification. The cases are all different. The origin is all different. The context is all different. We cannot generalize. But there is something that often it's repeated. It happens in closeted groups. It happens mostly in teenage women and also boys sometimes, and sometimes just women, like young women. It happens to people who is feeling oppression. It happens in societies in the context of that time, because it could be in a society, it could be now in the States, obviously, depending on the moment, that is going through some sort of oppression in that group. And for me, which is very interesting, it happens also in a group that is often dismissed, that we don't believe, that we just think, they are pretending or crying for attention. There's a case I really like. I never talk about it because it's very extreme, and I don't want the press to make all about that case. It was in Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very similar case than Mexico, in which often there is a clash between the culture of origin of this group, of this class, and a new belief system that is happening in society. In the case of Malaysia, it's all these girls in class that are suddenly the education is getting it's Muslim education. It's taking over, and it's very strict. It's very different of what they understood and their own beliefs. And they feel really oppressed. So they have these rituals where they have these rituals of possession. One of the big questions is also, is it conscious, it's semi-conscious, it's unconscious? And often what happens, because there's hundreds of cases happening, what happens is that at some point the shaman of Combs has a conversation with one of the girls, and the problem resolves. The problem is often they also have abuse from some of the teachers and things like that. So there is one case that it was going on and on and on and on and on for years. Nothing happened. And one day the girls, they were like 15 or something, they took machetes and they kidnapped the teachers. And then the president came and resolved the situation. Obviously, this is an extreme case, and I just want to put it as an example to understand this idea.
Alors, it's very interesting to come back on what you said about the criteria, because so the communities, so there are communities, they are like locked up communities, they're not so open. They are under oppression from a political system, educational system, or economical system, and they are also silent. They don't have a voice, and of course it's very important. All these elements are very important because you express, and we can go into that now. Maybe this idea, and I want you to really be precise about that. What is a proto-langage of résistance? Un proto-langage de résistance. What can it mean for you? Can we find a common ground, a common explanation, a common manifestation, a common sign of what is happening throughout these cases, and especially based on the 3 cases that you have investigated deeply. So maybe you want to take maybe the Mexican case. We can start by that. And so why and how did you come to define this proto-langage de résistance?
So one of the elements, actually, that I forgot to say, and it's good that you ask again, one of the ways that these cases are organized is also about where it happens. Most of the time it happens in schools. The second space where it often happens is in factories, women factories, and now we have the online setting, which is a new thing. So I decided to choose 3 cases that were first contemporary, because I thought it's interesting to see that this is happening now. The second element of protocol that I follow is that it happened in these 3 settings. The Mexico happened in a school, the Cambodia happened in the garment factories, and the Leroy happens in the States in a school, but is connected to social media, which is this first setting. So those were the elements that I follow. I also wanted to go through 3 different continents, and obviously one that is the West, because also it's important to acknowledge that. Mexico was the first one. In Mexico, what happens is that, maybe I can show a little bit of the video. I've never shown it, but maybe we can do it today. Just to give you a feeling of the moment and what happened, and I will explain what's going on. It's in Spanish, because obviously it's in Mexico. Mexico, it's fascinating because it's this school where we have 4,000 girls in a boarding school. The boarding school is a very Catholic, strict and repressive system. They also are Korean nuns, which is important, the fact that they are Korean, because when the girls arrive to the school, if you look at the video, they all look the same, because they have the same haircut, they have to wear this uniform, as she said, they cannot contact the family, they don't eat the food normally they eat, they cannot speak their language. They all come from indigenous backgrounds, or most of them from rural indigenous backgrounds, because in order to get to this school, you have to be under the line of poverty. So the situation is a perfect total institution, no? Which is this sociological perspective. This school is oppressing them, but at the same time, they have to feel very happy that they are there, because the families are very happy that they send it to this school, so they don't feel they can complain, and also they are being punished constantly every time they go against the rules, especially, for instance, speaking their indigenous language. No? The Tlapaneco is one of the many they go through. So in the exhibition, in this particular, the structure is also always the same. No? We have the way society is visualizing them through the media, through TV or through press, and then on the top of it we have the different sentences from authority that are trying to make an explanation, which often are also very sexist or very diminishing. Like they are mimicking each other, they are pretending, or like the head of the school who says that you have one bad apple that infects the rest. And then inside we have their voices, and they are not literally their voices, they are voice-over of the real testimonies. In this case, as I said, is translated to Tlapaneco, which is a very important political action. And then we visualize I visualize through visual metaphors the testimonies. And outside we have this light box, which is the interpretation from sociology, in this case, from this idea of total institution. So the proto-language of protest, it's a theory that comes from the factories. I will explain the second chapter, and it doesn't necessarily apply 100%, for instance, to this case, but already is giving you a lot of information. No, it's unconscious, and it's the body which is reacting to some oppression. So I would say a proto-language of protest might be sometimes superficial in the sense that it's much more complex, but it's already a theory that resonates for me with all the projects, all the cases.
Alors, you were to explain the structure for each case. So 3 cases in the central space of Le Bal downstairs are bringing a case in Mexico, in Cambodia, and in the States. Maybe so the case in Cambodia is especially fascinating to me, at least, because in this case you have several layers of possible explanation, and this also gives the opportunity to understand better with you the role that the people like anthropologists, neurologists, sociologists, you've met a lot of people. Some people, this expert, some have been working for 10 years on one case. And in the book, you have a few Entretien interviews with them, which are very enlightening. But also, it's very interesting to see that their explanation or their possible explanation are very different from another. And it creates a kind of instability in the comprehension of the case. Maybe on the Cambodian case, you can come back on these layers, and why was it so important for you to associate deeply this expert, let's say, specialist, to understand better what happened?
You know, when I'm working since the beginning, I'm very I'm very binary in the way I think, and when I thought abortion. On rape is already different, but especially with an abortion, I was like, okay, this is how we think generally, and I want to show you the other perspective. And I want you, and I'm gonna try to make it possible that you get out, and then you see this other option. On rape was already more difficult, but still, you know, a little bit binary. This project was very difficult, because at the beginning, when I found this proto-language of protest, I was like, this is it. This is the solution. I don't need any other opinion. I have the answer. And actually, it was in Cambodia, when I was working there, that I realized that I was wrong. So in Cambodia is the garment factories. The garment factories where they make fast fashion. No? It's one of the biggest industries in the world with Bangladesh. We have, you know, H&M, Levi, all these factories. At the end of, it's been a decade, more than 10 years, that we have faintings episodes, so women faint in groups in the factories. It was in 2015 that up to 2,000 women faint in the factories all over the year. So this idea of proto-language of protest is perfect, no? It's them that are trying to protest, especially in Cambodia, that when they have been protesting against the minimum wage, the police was so brutal that they actually killed people. I think it's 5 or 6 people were killed during protests of the workers. So it's not that they cannot protest, it's that they can kill when they protest, literally. So, you know, I came to Cambodia with this idea, and I've been reading with this transcultural psychiatric about another element, no? And he inspired this piece. He says that because many of these factories are built on top of the killing fields of the mass graves of the genocide of Pol Pot in Cambodia, And because the population has these animistic beliefs that they do see God in the nature, in the land, in the trees, is a massive disrespect to the ancestors to build this factory on top of their remains. So this is a map, this is a collection of satellite images of many of these factories that is placed on top of the Killing Fields map from Cambodia. So it's making this point about this theory that says that this could be a reenactment of the transgenerational pain. So actually, this anthropologist, which is also an anthropologist, but also a transcultural psychiatric, he says that the proto-language of protest is too shallow of an explanation, because we are forgetting about the animistic beliefs and this layer, which is really, really important. So this already opened my mind a lot. Like, how come we are trying to explain this from Western medicine and biology? We don't have a full explanation. Even with anthropology and sociology, which I thought we have the answer, with this theory, it's not. It's short to it. Then you talk to them, and they have a completely different personal element that comes, into the conversation. But even when I was there, I interview Sindicato, like the
trade unions.
Yeah. It's one of the if not the biggest female workers community that is unionized, is fully unionized in the world. These women protest a lot, and they unionize, and they organize themselves. So to pretend that they are weak and they cannot, is again a very kind of like weak perspective. They cannot protest, so they faint. Well, let's see. It's much, much, much more complex. So it made me reflect on my Western feminist view. It made me reflect on my Western medicine perspective. Even when I thought I had the answer, I didn't have the answer. So it was fascinating, to actually confront to this. And of course, we're trying to find a global explanation, but it goes beyond that, and it's complex. But this is a very interesting case because in the book, as you say, I decide who to interview, and sometimes I don't fully agree with many of them because, again, they kind of defend one perspective, and that was also very challenging for me because this is the first time that I include in the book theories that I'm not fully agree with it, and I have to thank you personally. I also open it and I allow you to decide, which is a very, very big effort from my part, because I want you to be very nice feminist, but the point is it feminist also short to it?
Alors, one thing about Cambodia that I think is also fascinating is to come back on the discussion we had the other day when Laia said to me and to the public, she said, I'm not trying to document, I am proposing a visual interpretation. So there is a huge gap between documenting, recording, and expressing. And of course, it's in such a case, can you a little bit elaborate on that? And especially, I think one of the key central point about this gap is the idea of metaphor that you bring in the pictures inside the case. Maybe you can give us a few examples to explain how do you move from their testimonies in terms of words and to the images that you produce. How do you produce them, and why? What is the justification for you to go into that mode of expression?
So I think it comes with On Rape that I took even more this idea of the meta element of photography, like the responsibility when we produce images, no? I've been reflecting from photojournalism and from documentary photography, what's our role and what it means when we visualize or represent, especially a victim or especially a survivor and a woman, how that affects society and our understanding of that person and that problem. And this is a meta element that has been constant. So when I was looking at this project, it's like, okay, if I document this, if I show you right away what is being used, or I do it myself, again, what's gonna happen is we're gonna focus on the fact that they look hysterical. We are going to focus on the expressions. We're going to focus on the violence of the images. We're going to get completely shocked by the visuals, because it's a shocking thing to look at it, no? And I already talked to my students and to everybody about this idea of not wanting to use the woman's body as an evidence of a problem or of a crime when we talk about rape or other types of oppression. So for me, especially thinking about Charcot and Les Adaptés and how they were doing this spectacle of hysteria, I wanted to avoid as much as possible to do a spectacle of hysteria, to a point that if I don't show it at all, it's confusing, so I have to show a little bit of it, but I want to reflect on what it means, the way we show it, and what's the point of it. So as you say, I'm not documenting, I'm visualizing the interpretations. I am making a criticism on the way, a critique or a commentary. It's not necessarily a critique because I don't think it's all wrong, but it's a comment on the way we show it and how we show it and why we show it. And then when I went through the testimonies, I listen them talking, or I hear them, or I interview them, or I read about what they go through. Because of many of these interviews were done by psychologists or were done by sociologists, there are very different types of interviews that the interviews a journalist does. It's very different of a type of interview I would do. If I go to Mexico and in 2011, which I was not there, no, in 2007, sorry, and interview the girls, my interview would be very different than the interview a psychologist or a sociologist does, because they have different protocols. The way I interview is quite journalistic. That would be the most journalistic thing I do, the way I interview people. So it was fascinating, because they asked them about their dreams, they asked them about their feelings, they asked them about many things that I would never, their fears, and I would never really think about it, no? I would be more practical. I would talk more about depression, and I would talk more about the nuns, and I would talk more about the institution. Obviously they were kids, no? Which is also... So when I was reading about these dreams and these fears, they were so visual, no? They have these images when they think, and they were a beautiful inspiration, no? So that was the beginning of the screen prints, the visual metaphors that are inside of the rooms. And I thought they were more respectful, and they were more profound, and they were more interesting, and they would trigger you to wanted to get into their life and their imagination, and they imagine. Obviously not all the people thinks the same way. The women in Cambodia, they also go quite spiritual, and they have a lot of nightmares, and it's also quite interesting. And it's a combination between visual metaphors of their testimonies, but also visual metaphors from society applying to them. I can give you an example from Mexico that for me is one of the most simple ones to... Yeah, good. Okay, so for example, I mentioned that in the school, they cannot celebrate their birthday. We're talking about 4,000 teenage girls who cannot celebrate their birthday, but they are only allowed to do it the day the founder's birthday, who was a man. The founder of the school, who, by the way, which is fascinating to me and no one talks about this, he died of sclerosis, and there's this photo of him not able to walk, that I always found that it was something interesting going on there, and no one really paid much attention to that. The theory of Josefina Ramirez, who is the anthropologist of the emotions that I work with the most, is that also there were few suicides in the school, and they were punished by having to run a lot. So this weak in the knees was connected to this, and I explained that in the book. But for me, being a teenage girl and not being able to celebrate a birthday and having to do it the day a man is his birthday, it kind of infuriated me. So we did this cake with not 4,000, of course, but a lot of candles. I almost set fire in my house, and it was this very dramatic sort of fiery kind of scene, no? So this was one of the first images, this type of trying to make a metaphor of these different testimonies that they go through.
So, of course, as a viewer, we can, while reading their words and expressing their fears, their nightmares, their doubts, we can see the metaphors you are. So it's a little bit like a double system that you bring into each case. I want to go through now to the third case, but also more in general. You know that at Le Bal we always have this perception that we have to bring the artist's view, the viewer's view, but also the more social view or media view on a case. And here what you've done is that outside of each case we can see triptychs, and these triptychs are reflecting on the reaction of the media, of the reaction of the authority. So basically they are outside the space of the case because they are like foreigners reacting, and they are very much using misogynistic or sexist arguments to dismiss what is happening, and it's really very striking that the same words and the same notions, very poor notions, are always bumping into these kind of discourses. So how did you get to these sentences? How did you select them? Were you trying to bring a tone or to bring the same notions? Or do you think there is a common ground of this mostly men reaction to the cases?
It's very interesting because the case in the States, in New York, is probably the one that is, from the media perspective, the most misogynistic one, which is, again, we would be surprised, but not. It's probably the biggest one. Also it was mass media, like it was for months, all the big outlets in the States were the case was very, very famous. But also we have these reactions from neurologists and, this type of authority, which were, for me, the most absurd ones, like, answers like, why there are mostly girls and not affecting to the boys in class? Well, hormones. I mean, you're a neurologist. That's not an answer. I mean, I'm not a neurologist, and I know that's not an answer. Or this from the media doctors or media anchormen saying that, oh, you seem better because you are smiling more today, and these kind of reactions which really infuriate me. The testimonies, which is the projection and the sound in the rooms, but also in the book in form of a script, it's actually created as a script because I accumulate interviews from all different outlets. The only place where I made interviews myself is in Cambodia because the case is live, so it's still happening, so I interview the women there. But obviously all this happened when they were teenagers and it happened 10 years ago. So I collect the material either from the academics or the investigators or the media. And I create this kind of conversation between the victims and the institutions, the victims and the institutions, it's like a fake conversation. That's probably one of the things that took me the longest, because it's a lot of accumulating and organizing and fact-checking and making a sense of it, and also understanding the society element. In the States, it was very interesting because the families were very, very, very upset with the diagnosis of mass hysteria. I know I'm saying mass hysteria all the time. We can point this later. It could be mass psychogenic illness, mass sociogenic illness. There's a whole discussion about the label, which I don't really like because I don't think it's an illness, so I use mass hysteria. But yeah, they were very against to this diagnosis because they were fearing that then the blame was on them. If my child is hysterical or has a conversion disorder, I'm the mom and probably it's my fault. So you have the family being very, very resistant to this diagnosis, and obviously because it was in social media and in mass media, it was a lot of pressure to them. I can show you a small part of a video of the first time that we know that someone going through this episode is filming themselves and is putting it on Facebook in this case. So what's interesting about this case is because it happens in the States, there was a lot of testing, a lot of neurologist testing, and I managed, which was very difficult, to actually interview the neurologists who treat them. Obviously, they take very seriously the rights of the patient, so they don't really share with you a lot of details, and that's why it makes it difficult. But that's one of the interviews in the book that talks about it. And yes, this case is special because it's the first time that social media plays a role in a mass psychogenic illness case.
So this idea of the case consequences being amplified by social media, but also distorting the relation between the outside advisor, specialist, expert, the families, and the girls. How would you describe this effect on this kind of triangle?
We do have a lot of recent cases happening in TikTok, which again is very interesting. Today, TikTok is getting banned in the States. One of the latest cases downstairs is called the tics epidemic in TikTok. I don't like the approach from media and some academics that point that the problem is social media. I don't think the problem is social media. I think social media is amplifying a problem already existing. Of course, social media exacerbates many elements and is making us sick to a point in some layer, but this is happening since medieval times without social media. So social media is becoming the way that is spreading, but not necessarily what's making them sick.
Alors, you wanted to come back on the title because it was a big subject among the team. That on mass hysteria. So obviously, this idea of using the title hysteria is problematic because what basically you do is you are denouncing the label, what you call the label, the title, mass hysteria. So the title of the show is ambiguous because first it looks like a statement, but when we understand what you do, you are destroying the idea, or at least you are trying to bring complexity, to bring something which is multi-layers, multi-interpretation. So why using this title in a way?
I mean, I'm not the only person or the first person who has done this. I have to acknowledge other people doing it. But the same way that the LGBTQ community or even in African American community in the States, they appropriate slurs, like words that are derogative or negative. I thought it was interesting to reappropriate hysteria because, as you know, the origin of the word, it's just uterus. Like in Greek, is what it means. It means uterus. So I found it even more misogynistic to take a beautiful word that is just the uterus and make it into a pathology or make it into, something negative. So I thought, okay, especially with this idea of protest. No, in the video that normally is in the room, we have these 3 screens with all these video protests happening all over the world in a juxtaposition with the 3 monitors showing mass hysteria cases. This idea that this could be a proto-language of protest, this idea that this hysteria, this uterus, this power, this pain, all these women protesting for abortion rights, against feminicides and rape and democracy, and this power and this sorority, this idea that women could be secretly in silence communicating to each other through this sort of phenomenon that we still don't understand how it works. I found it very powerful, and I like it, and I like the word, and I want to use it. I completely understand that it's complex. I talk to a lot of neurologists, sociologists, anthropologists, blah 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 blah, and I talk to them and like, how do you feel if I call it this way? Because I know part of your project is to destigmatize, and I explain, and some of them understood, some of them were like, I understand, but I really felt it makes sense, and I just want to change the way we use it, and maybe we start to use it positively, and then I will achieve my goal.
Alors, in this room, usually maybe we will end up with that. Laia, you have taken a very kind of bold decision because you are bringing a video, a montage on films that were shot by the press, by mostly
and people,
activists, I suppose, activists
like citizens
or citizens or the press, and you are showing over in 50 countries or so over roughly 10 years, some very spectacular, I must say sometimes, feminist demonstration against rape, against feminicide or laws against abortion. What is the mechanic or the tension that you want to bring between the cases of mass hysteria, which are very specific, in specific context, in specific time, and this kind of fresco? It's a fresco of a kind of feminist activism almost all over the world. So how does it work for you, this tension between the two, and why was it important for you to end the installation here with this video?
So it all started because when I was working on the project, it was the Iran Revolution. It was not the Iran Revolution, sorry, the latest Iranian feminist protest, and one. Exactly. And one of the cases that sparked the whole thing is because one of the women who was not following the rules and got into this asylum psychiatric place in Iran. So basically, women who had been protesting or, not wearing the veil, which is a form of protest, it was a form of a reaction to the oppressive government. They got into psychiatric facilities. So they were basically telling that they were crazy. And I found that fascinating because it was kind of connecting the whole thing. So I started working with Iranian activists, and I asked them to go to a neurologist to do an MRI machine so we can prove that they are crazy or they are not crazy in the way we want to prove someone is crazy or is not crazy or has hysteria, doesn't have hysteria. It was quite dangerous for them and it was complex, and I ended up not using it because it was also quite niche. But it was kind of the trigger to this piece, no? And this idea of every time we have women protesting, it was also the time when women were protesting in Mexico against feminicides, and they were quite violent. Mexico activists, feminists are really, really powerful, and they were destroying, and they were very strong. And obviously the media were saying that they were crazy, they were hysterical, they are not feminine enough, and things like that. So all these were like just a parallel of ping pong of these three concepts. And I thought, okay, I want to make a visual essay on the way women protest, because also women protest in a different way than men. And I want to understand how they organize and how they collectively try to express themselves. I also, in the video, there is a sequence that is connected to police brutality. There is a sequence that is connected to resistance, and they are resisting themselves. There is a sequence that is connected to creativity and the way they protest and how they physically, bodily protest. And obviously, it's connecting all these topics: abortion, rape, feminicides, which are the topics of a history of misogyny, but also are the topics that trigger many of the mass hysteria cases. So when at some point, in some times in the video, gets interrupted by some sound, is an MRI machine sound. It's like a bzzz, no? This type of machine that is trying to tell us if we are crazy or we are not. Obviously here I'm generalizing and I'm not saying MRI machines are terrible. Obviously this is magnificent medicine, we love medicine, but obviously medicine is biased and we can use it for the good and we can use it for sometimes a little bit bias towards women, and especially women of color as well. And when that sound gets interrupting the protest, the three monitors turn on, and the monitors contain the mass hysteria, the mass psychogenic cases happening in different countries, from the stories from the cases that you find downstairs in the folders, not specifically the three big chapters, 3 big cases, but all over the world. And I'm drawing, obviously, this comparison between the silent protest or the body unconscious protest through the active protest. I'm connecting the types of oppression, and I'm connecting this misogynistic aspect of trying to control women through medicine, through police brutality, through silencing them. And that's obviously also making a commentary on the way we film this and the way we show it, and with the way we explain it and contextualize it in the media. And it's important that it had the end, because also it's one of the first times I really tried in all my projects, I know it's difficult, to bring some sort of hope or some sort of resistance. Like, I know there are heavy topics, and I know people after the shows are really like shocked by it, but I really try to not go too much to the darkness and to the known hope place. And especially with this one was easier. And adding some resistance and some protest, I thought it really uplifted, it kind of gave voice to some silence issues, and then kind of takes you out of the show with a different type of mood that you maybe come from downstairs, and I thought that was important for the audience as well.
Dans le prochain épisode, retrouvez la première des 3 tables rondes organisées au bal, consacrée à la déconstruction de l'hystérie et modérée par Pauline Chanu, documentariste pour France Culture. Ce podcast bénéficie du soutien de Women in Motion, un programme de Kering pour mettre en lumière les femmes dans les arts et la culture.
L'écho du bal.